Hello, my name is Chrissy Hodges. I am a mental health advocate, OCD resource consultant, peer support specialist, and the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. Oh, look, and I have a book right here. Yay! Promotion! Right here. Thank you for having me on today to do this live video on mental health and the mighty. I'm really excited to be here as usual. And I've thought a lot about what I wanted to talk about today. I always think about what it is I can talk about since I come on here once a month that I feel like is meaningful to our community. Because regardless of what anyone is going through, this is a community of people where I feel like we can be open and honest with each other and be able to help navigate and work through big issues that come up. For me, before I get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today, which is, by the way, language, and I think it's such an important topic, is I just want to tell you a little bit about myself so you're thinking to yourself, well, who is this person and why is she talking about that? Number one, I want to stress, and I will do this many times during this video, I am not the language police when it comes to mental health at all. And I hate being policed on my own language. And if any of you know me or know my advocacy, you know I like to say what I like to say, and sometimes people like it and sometimes they don't. But for me, I am excited about being able to connect with people who understand what it's like to live with mental health symptoms and mental health and recovery. And so I like to be able to say what I need to say at times when I need to say it, and I learn along the way. So as we're talking about language today, I want to make that clear that anything that I say is just my opinion and based on my own lived experience as someone who lives with a mental illness, but also as an advocate, some of the hurdles that I have gone through along the way to get me to where I am right now. I am going to try to, and I see the comment, can you speak of anything different than main topic? I am going to try to keep an eye on comments. So if there is a question that you have in regards, of course, to obsessive compulsive disorder, I want to be able to address that later. And so, terminology, not cussing, Joanna. So yes, just the terminology in regards to strength-based language and person first, and I'll get into that in a minute. And so, if I see questions as I'm talking, and especially in regards to OCD treatment and things like that, I definitely want to try to address those at the end. I don't want it to run too long because I don't want to just ramble on because I have a tendency to do that anyway. But first of all, thank you for being here. And of course, the mighty and mental health on the mighty, thank you for having me. It's always an honor. I do want you to know I have a cat here named Barney who is circling around me meowing. So if you hear that, that's him, and he wanted to join us for for this live event. Okay, so who am I? My name is Chrissy Hodges. I'm a mental health advocate, have been for about 6-7 years. In regards to my lived experience with obsessive compulsive disorder, the type of OCD that I refer to as pure OCD or pure O, which goes right along with the topic I want to talk about today, which is language and language policing. Pure O is a nickname for the type of OCD that I live with, which is going to be sexual, violent, blasphemous, intrusive thoughts. They're unwanted. They're terrifying. I've had this since I was 8 years old. They are accompanied by anxiety, and I do compulsions to remedy the anxiety associated with the thoughts. I lived with this for 12 years undiagnosed, had no idea that I was living with a mental illness, and got to a point in my life when depression hit that I felt like the only option I had was suicide. And I attempted suicide. Luckily, I survived. I was hospitalized, and that's where I was diagnosed with OCD. The therapist that diagnosed me said, "I've never seen anything like this, but I think it's OCD." I always think that's funny because a secondary fear is, what if I don't have OCD and my intrusive thoughts are real? And so that did not help without his confidence. However, I was lucky, and I always recognize that in my journey, I was lucky. I went on for the next year. I used medication to manage my symptoms, and then I was lucky enough to be able to find a specialist for OCD, Dr. Stephen Phillipson in New York, who is still in practice, by the way. and he was able to work with me in order to learn behavioral therapy, which is exposure response prevention, in order to manage the anxiety surrounding the thoughts and help me to learn how to resist the compulsions. So that's a little bit about me. Today I wanted to talk about language for a few reasons. Number one, I've seen it come up on social media lately. When we're talking about mental health issues, language is a big component. Why? Isn't our main mission to destigmatize mental health? I mean, I think personally that's what we want to do. If we destigmatize it, more people are going to come out with their stories, ask for help, and have the confidence enough to be able to articulate what they're going through without that layer of shame on top of it. So language is really important. I've just seen a few things lately. I say a few, I'm lying. A ton of things lately of people trying to police language. And I hate that. I hate, I hate it and love it. Okay. I hate it and love it. Number one, I love the conversation. Number two, I do not like when people say what you should and shouldn't say or do. There's a better way to do it than shaming people. There's a better way to do it than, not understanding where someone's coming from. And that's what I wanted to communicate today. Not that I am the language police. Hello, I'm not. This is an opinion. This is just from my lived experience. But understanding what are some of the terms that are bothering a lot of us as advocates or people that live with mental health symptoms, and how we can get around accepting that sometimes you're in a stage where that language is appropriate, and there's nothing wrong with that. The first thing I wanted to say is person first language. If you don't know what that is, I refer to that as person first, or it's also strength-based language, meaning you are putting the person first before the diagnosis. Most of us know this as a universal movement, whether you're an advocate or not. The last thing you want is to be called, "You're so OCD," which is a whole other topic, by the way, about don't use OCD as an adjective. But also in regards to, and I'm going to tell you, like right before I was doing this video, my partner Sean, he was watching Jessica Jones, and by the way, I'm not criticizing the show, but I heard on the actual show, she said, "Well, are you schizophrenic?" And I was like, oh, I'm just about to talk about this and I can't stand it when people say that. That is an example of person-first language. Why? Why would you say you're schizophrenic? Why would you say you're bipolar or OCD or ADD? No, you don't. We don't want to say that. That is a universal movement that most of us agree with. Maybe there's some people that don't, and I don't see them often, but maybe it's people that don't understand. So the reason why we move toward that is we don't want to be our diagnosis, and we don't want our diagnosis to be, I mean, really, do you say to somebody when you find out they have, diabetes type 1, oh, they're so diabetic? Come on. No, you don't. No, none of us do. That's not, oh, you're so cancer. No, you don't do that. Nobody does that. And so with mental health, yes, this has been a movement to move forward person first, meaning I am a person that lives with obsessive compulsive disorder. I am a person that lives with depression. I'm not so depressed. I'm not so OCD. And let's just save that for another day. This is, I think, a universal way of communicating, which I think is great. Now, this is where we get into that gray area of language, which is, what are some terminology that some people may find offensive and other people don't? For me, I am at where I am in my recovery journey, which, by the way, recovery is one of those words that people either love or hate, and they can be anti with the fury of 1,000 suns, or they can be for, with all the clouds of angelic, whatever. But where I am, and again, I just want to share with you my experience. What I do is I look at where I am, and when I'm trying to communicate my message, what am I trying to do? This in my life as an advocate is I want to destigmatize those stigmatizing terms that come to, or not OCD, sorry, mental health, mental illness being one of them. People hate the term mental illness. They don't want it. They think about one flew over the cuckoo's nest. They think, I'm not mentally ill. I don't want to be this mentally ill person. I use this on a daily basis for one reason, and one reason only. So people get comfortable if they are talking to me and I am saying I'm someone that has a mental illness. They oftentimes will associate now mental illness to someone like me, which is someone who's living and managing their mental illness, versus what we all know mental illness to be stigmatized as somebody who is living in an institution, has zero support, zero capacity for anything, and that's just where they're going to be. Which, by the way, that's not what we want in a mental health community. We want to reach people that are in an institution and help empower them to be able to live a life of managing their symptoms. So it is tough to hear when people come out and say, well, don't use the term mental illness. Don't use it this or that. Well, what if there's a reason behind it? And that's why I wanted to talk about language today, because there are reasons why people advocate and reasons why people are doing what they're doing. My main mission is to destigmatize a lot of these terminologies and put a face to them, which is going to completely obliterate what people may think what mental illness did look like. I feel like in my own journey right now, I can't say what I felt like 2 years ago, and I can't say how I'll feel 2 years from now. I feel like that's what I feel comfortable with, and that's okay. So one of the things that I came up with, and I was having a conversation actually with a client earlier about this. So if you're watching, thank you for inspiring this talk. I was already thinking about it anyway, and then when he said this, I just thought this is an important topic. There are a lot of terminologies that we use that can be misconstrued as we are playing the victim, such as mental illness, such as, I wrote this down, such as suffering, commit suicide, things like that. So hold on. I know that you're going to hear that and then you're going to be mad at me, but hold on. These are some of the terminology that, yes, in mainstream media are thrown around and people don't understand. And in my own journey, I like to listen to what the community feels, and I like to listen to what the public can receive as far as information about the community, what the community feels. I'm going to give you an example of something that really, as an advocate, turned me off in regards to being confronted about language. I was doing a presentation a couple years ago in front of 100 people, and someone raised their hand after the presentation because I didn't understand the connotation between committing suicide, like the terminology commit suicide, versus what I now use, which is complete suicide, or die by suicide. I didn't understand. But instead of someone approaching me after, they raised their hand in front of 100 or so people and said, I think it's really ridiculous that you say the word commit suicide because my son died by suicide, and by you saying that, it was a crime. I was like, blood red. Here down of, oh, I didn't know this. I don't understand. Okay. Now, this is not something that I feel like maybe I should have known this. Did you know this before you knew it? I don't know. I didn't either. I grew up with that. I actually attempted suicide. So I didn't get it. And I wished that someone had taken the time. Maybe she should have pulled me aside and said, let me tell you my story. Let me tell you why your language makes me feel this way. But instead, it was in a public forum where I was humiliated. And everything that I had said up to that point was just, it was like a river washed it away, because no one cared about anything other than the fact that I am not sensitive to individuals who have died by suicide. It was a moment of humility. It was a moment of humiliation. And that person didn't stick around, which I wanted them to so I could talk more about it. I took that lesson and I thought about it, and I talked to my colleagues, I talked to other advocates, I talked to people that were living with and suffering with mental illness, and I said, what do you think about this? And I listened to what people said about that language, and I chose to change it. Could there be a different way to do it? Absolutely. Could it have been way more effective if you don't choose to humiliate people or tell them what they should and shouldn't do? Absolutely. And that I want to move on into, I wrote this down earlier today when I was meeting with my client actually, which was, what if language is subjective to where you are in your recovery? What if it's subjective to where you are? And so that way, understanding that when people are using language, you ask questions to them and you say, I feel this way when you say this, or this is my experience. What if we did that versus you should and you shouldn't say this? In my experience, and I want to explain more to this, and this may be kind of going all over the place, if you would just bear with me and let me explain. When I was diagnosed with OCD, after a suicide attempt when I was 20, what I call, by the way, pure OCD, which is the nickname for sexual, violent, blasphemous, intrusive thoughts. When I was diagnosed, hospitalized, I took on a layer of shame. The shame was so prevalent in my life, more so at that point than even the symptoms of the illness itself. I did not want to be someone that was mentally ill. I wanted that as far away from me as possible. And the reason why is because I had learned to manage it through medication. And then a year later went into therapy, specialized ERP therapy for OCD, and I learned to manage it through that therapy. I didn't want that title near me. I didn't want mental illness near me. I am not mentally ill. I am not that kind of person. In that stage of recovery, if someone had said to me, oh, you have OCD, okay, so you have a mental illness, I probably would have told them to F off, and it's not because I feel like I'm a jerk, but I wasn't in this headspace to understand that OCD is a mental illness and okay, I can handle the fact that I have a mental illness and that doesn't define who I am. Now, fast forward 10 years later, 10 years, hear me say that, 10 years I stayed in this place where I wanted mental illness and OCD as far away from me as possible. I would not ever even identify with either of those terms or anything that had to do with mental illness. And I made very sure there were big boundaries up. Fast forward to when I decided to become an advocate. And I started listening to what people needed to hear. I started listening to hear how people needed to know they weren't alone. There was a point in my advocacy where I thought, okay, it's okay to say I identify as someone with OCD. I identify with someone who had attempted suicide. I identify with someone who's been hospitalized. I identify with someone who has a mental illness. And that identification helped me connect with people on a deeper level. That was a phase and stage of my recovery. And as I have continued to move through that in the last 5, 6, 7 years, that progresses based on what I feel like the needs are in my own recovery and also the people that I'm working with and the community of people that we are together, by the way. It feels different when you're at different stages in recovery. And it's okay if you are at a stage where you hate the illness that you have and you need to get away from it. That's okay too. This is not this, you have to embrace it and you have to say that you have this and you need to forge the way for everybody else. No, you don't. Do what you need to do to work through whatever stage you're in. We usually can't rush the stages of grief. We usually can't rush stages of acceptance. So on my own journey, I can trace a thread where language I use today to describe what I've been through. I would have been pissed off at myself 10 years ago and said, well, that girl doesn't know what she's talking about and I hate her. I I would have hated myself 10 years ago. Now, who knows? Like, I may hate myself 10 years from now too. I don't know. And I don't mean that. I don't hate myself, but you get the gist. This is because we're in different phases. So I just want to reiterate what I wrote down. What if the language we use is subjective to where you are in your recovery? So here's what I'm asking you, and I'm going to keep talking. Where are you in your recovery journey, and what words trigger you and why? Now, this is not a do they trigger you and why, and you need to figure it out and get over it. That's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, does it trigger you and why? For many, many, many years, the term mental illness triggered me because I didn't want to be associated as someone with mental illness, because I didn't want to believe that I was that. In that statement itself, it says that I had my own stigma about what mental illness is, and why am I above that? The truth is, I have a diagnosable mental illness. I can say today, I am considered mentally ill. That may offend you, and it may offend me, but it doesn't go away from the facts that my illness is under that diagnosis. So why did it offend me for so long? And what do I need to do to move beyond that? Not meaning you have to accept that terminology, but what is it triggering in you? What is it needling? That's always a good way to look at it. So a couple words that I want to talk about that actually are, I've seen lately that have, kind of, I just go, oh, I didn't realize I shouldn't use that. And I already said the one, the commit suicide. I know that that's a big issue. And for me, yes, I have gotten to a point in my recovery that I choose to say die by suicide or complete suicide. I do not want to say commit suicide, number one, because I think that for me, I feel like as a community, we want to move beyond that term. But I do agree that commit, that terminology does say it seems it comes across as more as a criminal act. And I know, as someone who almost died by suicide, there was nothing criminal about that. It was a point in my life where I didn't think that I could move on. And I do not want to see that even my attempt in itself could be taken in that manner. And that's why I decided and I chose to amend the language that I use around that. Now, okay, I'm going to just tell you, I have seen and lately, the word recovery has come into play as something that we shouldn't use. I don't know, like I haven't seen a lot of people saying that, and I say that all the time. And so I've looked at some explanations of why we shouldn't use recovery or why we shouldn't. And this is a good example of where I don't have enough information on one side of the fence or the other. So I'm just going to stay doing what I'm doing. I think for me, I live in recovery. What does recovery mean to me? That means I'm continually, always trying to get better and learn to manage what I live with when it comes to mental illness, depression, substance use, any of that. So there are a lot of people out there that are against that terminology. I'm not really sure why, but again, mental illness. And then a term that came up today when I was talking to someone was suffering. The term, should we use suffering in regards to talking about someone who's living with a mental illness? So Chrissy suffers with OCD. So-and-so suffers with bipolar. So-and-so suffers. And I wanted to have this conversation. I'm so glad I did, because it is the stance of, do we want to identify as someone who is kind of a victim of what they're going through? Do we want to identify as that being, putting someone in a place of damaged goods? That's right. That was the terminology that was used. And here's my stance on that. And I've done a lot of contemplating about this since I had this discussion, and I knew I wanted to, and here I'm just like working it out right here with y'all, and I hope that's okay. I use the terminology suffering all the time. Number one, I use it in the grand scheme of looking beyond what I have and what I've been through and how that helps me have a different lens to this world, which will bring me to my next point after this. Human suffering is something I did not understand until I had OCD. I would never have been able to understand it unless I had OCD. Unless I had gotten to the depths where death seemed better than life. I will always value what that experience brought me and the lens that I've created now. So I do use that word pretty freely when it comes to describing where I am now in my recovery, but also when I'm relating to the community of people of OCD or mental health in general. I don't know if it's wrong or if it's, I don't want to say wrong. I don't know if it's not strength-based. The discussion that I was having was, well, maybe it's not empowering people when we talk about you suffering with a mental illness or me suffering. I should have said we. The way that I look at it is this, especially when it comes to OCD. Number one, our illness, and I'm not sure, you probably do know this, we get trivialized a lot. But OCD is debilitating. It's debilitating as it comes. And I want to make sure that when I'm talking to people about OCD and I say someone's suffering with OCD, that people understand there's a distinction between being so OCD and actually living with this illness that is ruling and managing their life. Number two, I think that there's also a time where people who, yes, they may get treatment or they may get on medication and everything's managed and they want to split and, like I was talking about before, like push it as far away from them as they can. Because sometimes in our mind, I think we think we don't have it as bad as other people. I don't know why. I felt like that. I always felt like, well, people are suffering more. I need to suck it up. I was lucky to have therapy. I was lucky to have this. And I want to, this is interesting. I feel like saying that you suffer with a mental illness can actually be empowering. Maybe because it can show you that you don't have to play a victim, but that yes, you were a victim of an illness you did not ask for. You did your best to survive it, and you did your best to move forward, and you can choose whether or not to be that victim. I needed permission. I know this is going to sound silly, but it wasn't until I worked with peer support specialists. I needed permission to grieve what I had been through because I was in that mindset of, oh, I got through it and I'm okay and I'm not mentally ill and I'm not this and I don't care. Nah. I needed permission to say it's okay to be sad. It's okay to recognize the havoc it wreaked on me, the trauma it instilled in me, and the consequences, failed relationships, strained relationships on family. The consequences of that happening, I needed it to be validated. So I think I see both sides, and unfortunately I'm sitting here working it out right now, and I can't come up with anything other than I see both sides. Someone thinks that it's, I don't want to be identified as a sufferer because I would rather feel empowered. I see that and I get it. And I also see another side to say, I also want to validate the suffering that we go through with mental health challenges and symptoms because it is suffering. Does that mean that we're victims or playing the victim? No. But we are victims of this illness, and it's okay to grieve over that. I hope that point came across in full circle. And hi, Stuart. It's good to see you. Stuart Ralph of the OCD Stories is on here, and thank you for being here. And if you want to check out his podcast at the OCD Stories, it is so awesome, by the way. So, lastly, I want to address a blog that was put on The Mighty, actually, or Mental Health on the Mighty recently by Rudy Casares. And it was, Rudy, I'm sorry, I don't have the title of it, but I can tell you what it is about is he wrote the blog. I'm sorry, Rudy, I was going to have the title right here so I could like quote from it, but I failed. Rudy asks people on his podcast if they could take a pill to take away whatever illness they're living with. I almost said suffering and I didn't. Oh, what's happening to me? Oh, thank you, Rudy. Oh my God, why can't I read? I'm bipolar and I don't want to be cured. Talk about language. I can't even read. Rudy had a lot of backlash from that article. And if you want to read it and check it out, go on to the Mighty site and it's Rudy Casares. Oh my God, did I just say it right? Casares, Caseres, and go on there and see what you think. I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. He wrote, I'm bipolar and I don't want to be cured. He asked me this when I was on his podcast. If you could take a pill and OCD will go away, would you do it? Now to like go back, and I haven't shared my story here, but if you ever want to know, like you can go to my YouTube channel, Chrissy Hodges, Pure OCD Advocate. My story is of human suffering, living with this illness and almost dying by this illness. There are things about my story I am still processing. I'm still experiencing trauma over. When Rudy asked me this question on his podcast, I kind of was taken aback. I wish I'd known that he was going to ask me. No, I mean, that's not an insult or anything, but just kind of like, I'm not usually like, when I'm doing any sort of interview. And he asked me, and I did think to myself, would I? And I hesitated because I didn't know what to say. I'm 41 years old now. I consider myself in recovery, which maybe some of you don't like that word. I really don't care. That was not nice of me, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not interested in being policed, and I'm not going to police you. But I consider myself in recovery. Would I get rid of it? Rudy talked about how he wouldn't, and a lot of people didn't like that. And I get both sides. So here I am, I'm on both sides of the fence. The only thing that I can talk about, though, is my own experience and how I feel as being validated. I would not take a pill to take away my OCD. Ugh. Now, if there was a clause on it that said you can take a pill and you'd never have symptoms again, yes, I would do it. But see, that's not the question he asked. So I guess the answer is no, because again, the same way I said, what if language is subjective to where you are in your recovery? If you had asked me 10, 15 years ago, would you take a pill to make all of your OCD go away? I would have not just said yes, I would have said a resounding hell yes. Because I wasn't in a stage or in a place of recovery where I had learned to accept and to love who I was with it. To accept and to love who I had become because of it. I do not define OCD. It does not define me. I didn't know that for a long time. I just wanted to be away from it. So yes, I think that if I could take away the symptoms moving forward, of course, because none of us really want human suffering. Even though I do feel like for myself, understanding human suffering has been the key to my happiness and where I am now. Without what I have been through with OCD, depression, substance use, my suicide attempt, hospitalization, and the duration of recovery, which, by the way, took a very long time, and the grieving of all of it, I would not have the life that I have right now. I wouldn't be sitting where I am. I wouldn't be interacting with you. I wouldn't know the people that I know, and I wouldn't be doing a job that is fulfilling for myself and also gives me the ability to connect with people all over the world to help them know they're not alone. I know that his article spurred a lot of controversy because people were like, and especially family members, and I get that, and I understand the outrage and the anger from that perspective. It's also important to remember, just like language, there are different stages for all of us. And when you reach other stages, and Felice, you're on here right now, and you are a family member, and so you get it. Reaching different stages and being able to understand that it is okay to progress through an illness to a point where you actually appreciate what you've been through. Isn't that what we want? It's okay, though, to still associate it with trauma. I mean, I'm not saying it's okay, please do. I mean, there are ways that you can get help for that, but I still associate a lot of what I went through with trauma, with sadness, and with anger. And I'm okay being in that stage right now. So I would encourage you to go read his article. And he wrote in the comments what it is. Hopefully he'll link to it too. And I would encourage you to think about where you are in your own recovery. What stage are you in? And start looking at why and what are the things, language, articles, things that really just get you going. And trust me, I don't think there's some final stage in recovery where you're like, I made it, nothing bothers me. I mean, I'm certainly not there. Obviously, I'm talking about this topic where things still bother me, and I still think, oh God, am I saying the right thing or the wrong thing or whatever? But where are you? And why do things bother you? And what does that say more about what you're going through and what I'm going through at the time than where the other person is? Because I think as a community, we need to remember that. We really are all in this together. And the important thing that we all need is to meet each other with empathy and meet each other where we're at. Regardless if that means I'm 21 years into what I consider symptom recovery and someone that's 6 months, we can still meet in the middle. And I'm hoping as an advocate and as members of this community, we can always remember that and always have grace and always have empathy when we are speaking on topics like this. So I probably went a little bit longer than I usually do, but I hope this topic resonates for you. It's really important for me. And I do want you to know, I do my best to be mindful of language. And quickly, before I finish, I just want to tell you the story of how I really became mindful of language. I worked for a behavioral healthcare place, and I was contracted out to the state institution. And we did this thing where we were just mindful of language. So we wanted to think about, or we wanted to be mindful every single week of what are some of the language things that we're saying that could be stigmatizing, meaning like words like crazy and insane or things like that. And what could we do to replace it? And that next week, I'm sitting as a peer support in the middle of the milieu. And I'm loud. And when I talk to people, like, we laugh and we talk or whatever. And she said something, like the woman I was talking to, she said something. And I went, oh my God, that's insane. Really loud in the milieu. And it was like, crickets. And I was like, you know what I mean? And she just started dying laughing. And I was like, I didn't mean it. And everybody was cool about it because, you know, we were all on the same level. And so I went back, of course, to that meeting, and I was like, okay, if I'm mindful, I can see where I am saying things that are stigmatizing. And so just a quick example to say, sometimes if we're just mindful of our language every single day, we can start to see where a little bit of the cracks are or where, and then why. Why did I feel like it was okay to say insane? Especially when I'm working in a psych institution, not okay. But why did I think that? And what are the steps that I needed to do to change that? And I did. I looked at words I could replace it with, and it was great. But it was a laugh that I got to have with my client and so many other people. And I think that we can do that every single day. So, gosh, thank you for tuning in. And I hope this was helpful to you. It really was helpful for me. I knew I was going to talk about this, and I know it's something that's important to our community and something I think that we need to keep talking about. So thank you for being here. My name is Chrissy Hodges. I'm a certified peer support specialist here in Colorado. I work with people worldwide to help support them in living with mental health. I am an OCD resource and referral consultant, and I am the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. You can find me at ChrissyHodges.com or on YouTube at ChrissyHodges/Pure OCD Advocate. And I cannot wait to see you again next month. Bye. And thank you, Mental Health on the Mighty.